We're always looking for sports where the relationship between the athlete, the players, and the governing body or the IP that we're investing in is tight and aligned. That's going to help us generate value out of that relationship,
Right.
that sort of coexistence.
Hi, everyone. It's Aviva Rumani, and this is KindredCast, unfiltered conversations with the business and cultural leaders who shape the world we live in. KindredCast is a production of LionTree, the independent investment and merchant bank for creativity, community, and capital.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with Danny Townsend, the CEO of SURJ. Danny successfully made the transition from athlete to executive in the world of sports and had a number of different roles across different areas of the sports ecosystem in Australia, finally culminating in the role as CEO of the A-Leagues from 2022 to 2024, before you were convinced to move to Riyadh and join SURJ as CEO. So first of all, thank you for being with us. Really excited to talk to you here today, and would love to start maybe just understanding how you ended up here and what inspired you about the project.
Yeah, look, firstly, thanks for having me on, James. I think, look, from my perspective, having worked in sport for the best part of 25 years, my previous agency led me to work all over the world, fortunately, and had the opportunity to live in Singapore and work in Singapore, then into London for a bunch of years, and then over to New York, and then we were fortunate enough to sell our agency and then move my family back to Australia, which was great, and really enjoyed sort of the 5 odd years back there working in football. But we always had as a family a sort of an itch to go back abroad at the right time. Our kids were still finishing high school, so we weren't quite ready to move abroad until this opportunity came up. And when it was sort of presented to me, it was one of those ones where initially I'm like, well, we're not quite ready as a family to move back abroad again. But this is the type of thing that is extraordinary and won't come around again if you don't consider it. And after discussing with the wife and the kids and speaking to the PIF and the people involved, it was really a pretty simple decision in the end.
But it was a decision, as you say, that required some sacrifice, right? You and your wife spending a lot of time apart, you and your kids spending a lot of time apart, but one hell of a project. So, we know from where we sit that sports is one of the key pillars of the nation building that's going on in Saudi Arabia. So it must be incredibly exciting, but also a big weight on your shoulders to be one of the leaders of that pillar in the region.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Sport is a key part of Vision 2030, and certainly there's a lot to do. And I think when I took the opportunity on, it was always going to be challenging for various different reasons. One, the sort of the expectation that comes with the PIF and what the kingdom more broadly was looking to achieve out of sport, and then also I suppose the expectations of the outside world who expect Saudi to come in and go and I suppose impart their influence over the sporting landscape quickly. And I think just given the nature of how we do business and probably the misconception that we're out there just spraying money around and not really looking at through an investigative lens that having worked with LionTree, the way we work. So I think there's that balance of being effective in how you deploy the capital, having the impact that you want to have in using sport as a tool to drive social change here in the kingdom, but importantly invest that money wisely and get the returns that the PIF expect.
And the social change piece is interesting, right? I mean, to your point, I think when Saudi started showing up as a big player in the world of global sports, you could forgive the outsider for thinking Saudi wants to be in sports just because sports is cool, right? But when you spend time in the region and you speak to people like yourself and other leaders in the space regionally, you realize it's actually a very deliberate view, and it's centered around youth sport and participation. It's centered around diversity and women's sport is a big initiative as well. How big, sitting in your seat, like how much of it is let's play the financial game and invest in sport as a investment? How does that sit alongside the nation building aspect of it?
Yeah, I think, look, first and foremost, as our title of a company, SURJ Sports Investments is about investing the capital for a return. So I think, the primary objective of the company is to deploy the PIF's capital into the sports sector and get the returns that any other investor would seek out of it. I think that the beauty of the role and the responsibility is that there is a sort of a byproduct that we seek out of that deployment, and that is around having a genuine impact on social change, whether that be through mobility metrics that are very much tied to well-being, or whether that be gender equality and how we drive to creating more opportunities for females to participate in sport. So, it is always nice to have a sort of a dual mandate where you wake up every day knowing that you've got to think wisely about where you deploy that capital. But then on the flip side, what is the impact going to be of that investment, and will it meet those other softer metrics that we're KPI'd against?
Yeah. And today's conversation is obviously focused around sports, but we're sitting here in this incredible studio space, Merwas Studios, that is a reminder of the kingdom's ambitions in another passion area, which is music. And, Merwas is touted as an entertainment factory because it provides full service. There are 22 world-class studios here. It's an incredible space. And it's, all about nurturing young Saudi talent and not only providing the facilities and the service, but also the infrastructure and the, frankly, IP management tools to make sure that Saudi culture can flourish. And fun fact, Merwas was awarded the Guinness, I don't know if you know this, there's a plaque over there, Guinness World Record for largest studio in the world, which, it's a very Saudi way of doing things. You show up with intent.
Yes.
But first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to the leadership at Merwas Studios and Salah for letting us do this here. But it leads me to my next question, which is that PIF has invested across a number of different verticals, right, and has set up some very impressive companies, SURJ being one of them, Salah and Merwas being another, Savvy being another, and there are many, many others. How much of your role is looking for interconnectivity between these various different spaces?
Yeah, I think it's a real opportunity to build on, right? I think we all tend to get caught in our own worlds with our own boards and our own KPIs as portfolio companies. Our responsibility is for the company that we're either CEO of or responsible for as board members. And I think as we're evolving these relatively nascent companies in the context of SURJ, we're a 2-year-old business. Sellers had a very long history in serving this region in various different sort of subsectors of the sport and entertainment environment. So they've got a much richer history than ourselves. But how we coexist and work together for a common goal. I think the beauty of being a PIF company is that we're all pushing for that same North Star. And you could even throw 54 into the mix as well, another sport agency that sort of we all coexist together on. I think we're only at the early stages of trying to find better ways to help each other meet their respective objectives. But we see that as opportunity rather than anything else. And we do a lot of work with Seller as a specific agency, being a real sister agency to us, and we'll continue to build on that, I think.
Which makes total sense and is sort of a lead into another topic I want to talk to you about, which is stadia, where I do see that's a natural breeding ground for collaboration across various different entities. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what stadia is, because I think it's a very thoughtful element of Saudi strategy leading up to the World Cup and beyond. So look, Project Stadia Co has been one we've been working on for the past 18 months, really in trying to solve for what is ultimately going to be an opportunity, not challenge, for the kingdom to take advantage of, given the enormous amount of tier one sport and entertainment infrastructure that is being built, whether that be for the Asian Cup, AFC Asian Cup in 27, the FIFA World Cup in 34, the Giga projects as they build out these unbelievable future cities that have got arenas and various other opera houses and entertainment facilities. How we serve those well in terms of the customer experience is very important, but also how we populate them with world-class content that's going to drive more live event attendance. You can't think about these things in isolation. It's a sort of a full court press. And when you think about our mandate in bringing IP to the country, that's very much around inspiration. When you think about participation growth, you can't just expect participation growth to happen without inspiring someone to pick up a tennis racket. You can't expect someone to suddenly drive into the live event experience if there isn't something world-class that stimulates them to do that. So how we fill those arenas and stadiums with content is going to be really important, and that's going to be more than just sport.
as we've seen with the Riyadh season and what His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh has done with the comedy festivals and music and art and culture and sport, that sort of combination of content acquisition and then the delivery of a world-class experience when you go to one of those events, that's a real opportunity and something that's really critical to the utilization of those assets as they come online over the next sort of 5-6 years.
Yeah, and I think that's what you've just touched on is something that, again, those of us who are watching you do your thing and cheering for you, we see that and we see the impact you're having already. And, first of all, you just announced a big deal in tennis, which is very exciting. And congratulations. And we're proud to be a small part of that. And tennis for me is a case study. If you look at the numbers in the kingdom in terms of like the adoption of tennis among the population, how has that played out? How have you ensured that your investments in tennis have led to a healthy, more active population?
It's the perfect case study for how you evolve a sector from publicly funded and supported to privately funded. And I think when you look at the Ministry of Sport's responsibility in the kingdom, it is ultimately to build those pathways and have those events that inspire young Saudis to want to pick up a tennis racket or kick a football or take part in a triathlon. It's been very much led by them over the last decade. I think naturally any, let's call it public ministry that's there to set up a subsector economy, at some point their role is to step back and let private sector, foreign domestic investment come in and lead with that when your economy is a little bit more mature. And I think if you look at tennis and the evolution of that in the kingdom, the Ministry of Sport invested in the ATP Next Generation tournament up in Jeddah 4 years ago. They then doubled down on tennis with the WTA finals, which were about to start year 2 of a 3-year deal there. They're both rented assets. And both those two organisations, the ATP and the WTA, will ultimately shop them to the highest bidder around the world.
Sure.
And it is very difficult for you to build infrastructure, build the development pathways, the coaching structures around a rented asset, because if either of those two go away anytime soon and you've gone and built a significant facility that becomes an empty vessel, then that's not a great return on that investment. So, we've been very big on SURJ and how do we help the ministry transition from sort of funding partner to regulator. And I think this ATP Masters 1000 has enabled us to build on the credibility that the ministry has sort of created through those two tournaments, and then have a tournament that we now have in perpetuity. It will be in Riyadh forever. We can now invest in significant infrastructure around that. We can look at the tennis court development around Riyadh and the other parts of the kingdom, look at coach education. How do we get better tennis coaches? How do we get more elite pathways so we can nurture those young Saudis that are going to pick up tennis rackets in the next couple of years as a consequence of this investment, and then in however many years from now see them on the ATP or WTA tours. So it's a really great example of how Saudi has to evolve from being that publicly funded sort of country into private sector funded.
Yeah, and I mean, we were pulling up some stats on tennis, right? And if you look at the number of tennis clubs in Saudi, they've gone up by 150% over the last
I think there's
couple
140 clubs now across Saudi Arabia, which back 2019 there was probably a handful.
So how important is that to you? So you made this investment with the wind in your sails, if you will, right? There's already, as you say, the Ministry of Sport had already done some of the legwork. Is that part of the thought process when you look at what the next?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of, there's no point us going down our own path without being connected into the mothership around what are we doing as a country. And there's the reason why His Excellency Badr Al-Qadi is my vice chairman, who is the Vice Minister of Sport, is to ensure there is connective tissue between what SURJ are doing and what the ministry are doing. We look to invest in sports that are important to Saudi Arabia, that there's interest here already. I'm not going to go out and seek an investment in ice hockey when it's not really a sport that has any relevance here in the kingdom. So we tend to stick within the framework of the national sports strategy. And if we can identify IP that is going to enable us to replicate that same transition that happened in tennis, then that's certainly where we're looking. And that also comes with the Giga projects. As a PIF company, we look at Qadr and their ambition to be a sport and entertainment hub in the region. Look at Red Sea, what's going on over there in, on the Red Sea, and how water sports and those type of things are important. Neom with extreme sports, Roshan with community sports. They've all got ambition to play a role in the sort of the tapestry of sport. How can we help them deliver on their objectives by the investments that we make in IP? So we've got quite a really strong connection now between those different stakeholders to ensure we work together.
Yeah, it's amazing. Because that kind of coordination is hard to do.
I think it's unique, and I think the beauty of where Saudi's at in its business cycle means that we're early enough to build it right from the start. I think if you go and try and change things in mature markets like the UK or the US or even Australia, where I'm from, there's just so much pent up sort of reasons why you can't do it in a certain way because of history. And I think we've got the ability to write that ourselves from the get-go, and then we're certainly going to take that opportunity.
And I guess somewhat related to that, we've certainly noticed you share our LionTree's enthusiasm for what we call challenger leagues, sort of the up-and-coming league within an already established league, right? We were fortunate to advise you on your PFL transaction, which is obviously a challenger league within the mixed martial arts space. You've worked with Kings League, which again is a challenger league with a different dynamic format, and I'm not sure whether it's challenging football or esports or both. But
bit of both, yeah.
What's the thought process there?
Look, you're an investor, right? So you invest for growth. In UFC, if we take the PFL example, UFC have done an amazing job over however long, a decade plus, and Dana is a force in himself, and he's created by far the market leader in MMA. But I think our thesis there is that combat sports is an enormously interesting sport. It is growing rapidly. It's one of the most, sought after sports in the world, and there is one clear outlier there, and that is the UFC. And PFL has positioned itself quite clearly now as the number 2, and the growth opportunity to take PFL from where it is today to where the UFC are today is enormous. Trying to impact the UFC by investing in them. Public company, our TKO anyway, so that's sort of a different opportunity. But taking a multi-billion-dollar company to being a more valuable multi-billion-dollar company is a lot harder than taking a multi-hundred-million-dollar company to a billion-dollar company, and that's certainly where we see the opportunity with PFL.
And with PFL specifically, I think part of what was interesting about the strategy was the regional build. Right, and I know that there was part of the plan was building a regional sort of league centered around the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. How important is that when you're investing in global sports, building the local piece?
In that case, taking the UFC on a head-to-head basis, you're going to lose. So that's not a winning strategy. I think what we liked about PFL is its regionalisation, and the fact that PFL Europe was massively successful. They're an underserved MMA community, the same in the Middle East, the same in Southeast Asia, the same in Latin America, because the UFC fly in, fly out. They come in, they put on amazing events, they generate an enormous amount of interest, and then they leave. And if you're a young Jordanian Muay Thai fighter, how do you ever find your way to the UFC without some form of pipeline or pathway? And what PFL is about is creating that regionalised opportunity where you can give them, these aspiring young athletes, the opportunity to become professional and fight in a professional league, and if successful, sort of graduate up to the global PFL league, and then one day potentially, fight in Madison Square Garden as part of a PFL top card. So, UFC don't have that fighter pipeline that we have, and I think we look at it as saying, well, if we've got first look at all the best up and coming MMA athletes on the planet, then that's a pretty good place to be as UFC look to continue to build their roster. Where are they going to build that roster from? So I think, not only is it great for the local market, I think it's great for our business that we have that pipeline of fighters that will be the next generation of great fighters. I think importantly for us, and what it did for PFL MENA in our instance, is that it's given Saudis an opportunity to put themselves on a world stage. And I think probably the best example we have in any of the investments we've made is Hattan Alsaif, who is a young female Saudi MMA athlete. Before PFL MENA, she was non-existent in terms of profile, and through her hard work, talent, and the platform of PFL MENA, she's become one of the most recognisable faces as a Saudi athlete, and that's something we're really proud of. She's done an amazing job, but that's where that combination of our ambition, the opportunity that exists here that's underserved, you bring those two things together, magic can happen.
Yeah, it's a beautiful success story. Turning a little bit to youth sport, we at LionTree spend a lot of time focused on youth sport in America because it's a massive and growing market. You've obviously touched on youth sport extensively already throughout our conversation, right? Because many of the investments you make have that flow-on benefit. But how do you holistically think about youth sport and supporting that in the kingdom?
Yeah, look, youth sport for me, and it's always been a bugbear of mine, and largely because of the fact that professional sports over the last 30 years have not really needed to care about the participation base of their sport. They've operated in a world where they've got a big check from a media company. They've essentially taken that money and gone and played sports and put on a show, which has worked well and served the industry well. The reality is that economic landscape is changing, and as you look forward and you look at the direction of travel, sports are going to have to rethink the economics that they look at and go from what is a linear sort of cable-related relationship with their customers into a direct-to-consumer one through the streamers and through just genuinely how you utilize data and get to understand your customers better than you've ever needed to in the past. Because if you don't find ways to monetize those customers or those fans through digital means, you're never going to be able to fill the arbitrage between what the ARPU of a linear customer or cable customer was with a digital customer. They're just different. And sports are now coming to terms with that. The most loyal customers you have are the ones that play your sport. So if you can find a 6-year-old who's registering to play football for the first time and influence their customer journey over the next 60 years in where they register to play, where they buy their shirt and their shin pads and their boots, where they get told and communicated to by their local club for training and match day, and where they get rewarded for scoring goals, and where they buy their merch for their favourite team, buy tickets, you get the drift, right? If you can build a genuine digital economy around your sports participant, and then the sort of the concentric circle that comes around them, the parents, the siblings, you start to build an ecosystem of people who care about that sport and therefore will spend money in that sport if you provide them utility or you give them reason to keep coming back. And I think that starts with participation. And if you get that right, then I think the future is bright for sports. But if sports ignore that and continue to focus on the very elite end of their sport, there will be sports that will struggle to meet that sort of gap in the media rights situation.
Yeah. I mean, we see that in America, even sports that are sort of staple American sports are having to ask the question, like, if people don't play these as a kid, are we going to lose an audience?
For me, it's sort of the bellwether for the future of the sport. If your youth participation is growing, then that's a good thing for the elite end of the sport where we tend to invest. If that's in decline, you got to ask yourself a question as an investor: is that indicator a red flag in what this IP might be worth in the future? So we look at that very closely.
And as you said correctly, right, in this new distribution landscape, you don't have to be a mass market sport. You can have an extremely avid, right? Like I think of lacrosse as an example, which to me is a sport I'd never heard of until I moved to the US. And it's, I don't think, a massive sport, but the people who love lacrosse love it. So you touched a little bit in your answer on distribution and monetization. And obviously you guys made a very impactful investment in DAZN. And similar to the PFL example, you're creating a DAZN MENA platform. Would love to talk about what excites you about that partnership and where you think the distribution landscape is going in this region and globally?
Yeah, look, I think if you go back a step, our interest in DAZN was very much around that digital customer and how you cultivate that customer and serve them well and serve them more than just streaming. I think our view with DAZN, if you look at DAZN's roadmap and sort of product offering, it is more than just being a streaming service. Because if you're a football fan of a club in Germany and you've got DAZN because they've got the rights to the Bundesliga, and you're a Mönchengladbach fan, you go there once a week to watch Mönchengladbach, then the minute those rights move somewhere else, you go wherever that is. So in order to sort of mitigate that risk of churn, you need to be more than just a live streaming platform. And if you look at what DAZN's building out, it's very much that e-commerce, news, scores. It's a place where you should be default attending when you want to learn and engage in German football. So I think for us it was more about how does DAZN morph itself over time into being the glue that sticks a participant or a fan to that sport in that country, but equally how does it deliver on that globalization that's happening at the same time? There's this sort of localization requirement that a lot of those domestic sports have, but then when you take a step back, it's how do you think about the global landscape of sport. And you've seen the NFL Game Pass go to DAZN. You've seen NHL recently announce a very similar platform. FIBA have had that already. So we see DAZN really playing a key role in the fan experience far beyond where you watch your live content, and that will continue to evolve over time. But that's what we saw. And that when we take a step back again and look at our thesis around the IP we invest in, that those IPs are going to live, and the growth of those IPs are going to live and die by their ability to engage a digital customer. And if DAZN are a solution for that, and that's not to say that every one of our IPs will live on DAZN. Obviously, you're going to want your IP to sell their rights or engage with a platform that's going to pay them the most amount of money or give them the best commercial exchange. But they're all going to need a DAZN-like solution. And I'd rather invest in a DAZN-like solution than a linear one.
And when you say a DAZN-like solution, you're talking about not only optimizing the media rights, but also the rest of the sort of monetization.
Where they sell tickets, where they sell merch, where they provide services to the sport that they're serving. And I think go back to that discussion around participation and why engaging that young participant is so important. The customer lifetime value for DAZN in engaging those young sports fans and then serving them really well and encouraging them to go back to DAZN multiple times a day, let alone a week. That's what's going to create an enormous amount of value, not only for the sport that uses DAZN's platform, but also for DAZN as the platform. And that's exciting to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's very future leaning. Another area that I'd love to get your take on is the athlete as a creator, right? We spend a lot of time focused on that, and a lot of athletes are sort of looking at we've just talked about how the IP owner monetizes more broadly, but I think when you look at it through the athlete's lens, it's sort of the athlete becoming an influencer, a creator, a seller of product. How do you think about SURJ's role, or even the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's role, in helping local athletes through that question? Yeah,
I think the creator economy or influencer economy has become sort of parlance in most other sectors, and I think the athlete economy is one that's certainly going to be relevant in our sector. I think it's a balance, right? Because the athletes are such important parts of every IP you have. But the IP must always be bigger than the athlete in a way, because if that's the case, individuals will have a life cycle, where they are relevant. Just by nature of the fact, sport, you can't play sport forever. The sport will always outlive the athlete. So, but whilst that athlete is at the peak of their powers and they have influence, they're enormously important for that IP. So I think we're always looking for sports where the relationship between the athlete, the players, and the governing body or the IP that we're investing in is tight and aligned. That's going to help us generate value out of that relationship, that sort of coexistence. I think when we look at Saudis and young Saudis coming through, we're fortunate, and it probably talks to our Kings League investment in that, this is a marketplace that is skewing enormously young. 80% of the population is under 35. That's a pretty significant population that are young, digital first, very much into the influencer economy, but importantly into football. So when you put all those things together, that is the Kings League. So that was the rationale for us investing in that. And we had our first event last Friday night. It sold out in 11 minutes. The ratings across the different streaming platforms were like nothing I've seen before in sport. So it just talks to the right IP at the right place with the right audience. If you get that sort of combination right, you're going to be successful, and we're really excited about Kings League. But what Kings League is doing for young Saudis as well, who are trying to amplify their own, their own influence over the consumer base, Kings League just does that, and we've seen that already in the limited time it's been in market.
Yeah, it's an incredible platform, and just for the American listeners, when you say football, you mean soccer.
I mean soccer.
Yes,
yeah.
Good.
Yes.
The right way of saying it.
Well, look, I'm Australian, so we called it soccer for a long time, and then when we saw the light and changed it to football when I was a kid.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think last question for me: what's next for SURJ? Obviously, you have a massive portfolio that you're managing actively and optimizing. There's the StadiaCo project, but where else should we expect to see you, to the extent you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, look, I think we've talked about, and I've talked about it before publicly, that, we look at sports that have sort of rich histories, have got significant participation bases, that serve the biggest economies of the world, that skew young. They're the sort of ingredients that we look for. If you've got those characteristics, then we're interested. And I think the other thing we look for is sports suffering a little bit of product apathy, that need a transition away from maybe what they've done in the past to what they might need to do in the future in order to attract that younger audience that just consumes sport differently. So if we see that sort of product apathy and we see that dysfunction and disaggregation of commercial rights, and there's a chance to use our capital to put those sports together in a way that will see them thrive in the future, then that's where we like to think about our transformational impact we can have on those sports. So you look at, there's Olympic sports out there that we all know that have been around a long time, and every 4 years become, everyone's favourite sport, and then they disappear for 3 years, or they step back into a less prominent position on the sporting calendar. How can we help make those sports more of a 365 every year they're on type of sport? So we look at those type of sports. We're not necessarily looking at the biggest sports in the world and trying to make them bigger. I think if we can look at that second tier of sports and take some foundationally strong characteristics and make them better, that's where we're interested.
Yeah. Well, listen, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for the time and the insights. This is the epicenter of, I think, a lot of what's happening for good in sport. And really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah, and look, thanks to LionTree, obviously been a great partner of ours on a number of our deals we've done, and I'm sure we'll look forward to doing more of them in the future.
As do we.
Thanks,
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the KindredCast channel on YouTube. Stay tuned for more conversations with leaders in business and beyond.